All right, so yes, it has been a while since I've shot a video, a little over a month now, and in that month's time, a lot has happened here at Shuggie. Everyone has gotten at least their first vaccine shot, a mixture of Pfizer and Moderna administered at Shoppers Drug Mart, a Rexall, and a Food Basics of all places. Anyway, it feels good to have had our first shot, and I'm hopeful that Kay will get her second shot well before the return to school in September. That'll be great because, frankly, she kicked ass taking her classes online last year, but talking to some parents in our office, their kids aren't doing as well. I mean, I think about how drained I am after a day of Zoom meetings, and I just can't imagine having all my learning mitigated through Zoom. So kudos to them. I look forward to them getting back into the classroom. In the meantime, the second shot is scheduled for about 4 months out, but the way things are progressing, it's looking like that'll get advanced. I think here in the region, 70% of the population aged 18 or over have already gotten their first shot. So all signs are looking optimistic, and that's great. On the downside, recently I was also featured online in a newsletter that featured a couple of my videos, which sounds great, but frankly makes me want to cringe. I want to implode in a gravitational well of self-consciousness until I disappear into this black hole of obliviousness. You'd think sharing a namesake with someone who's a prolific writer and has one of his books coming out even as a movie, married to another successful YA author, would relatively obfuscate me online for someone searching by my name, but clearly that's not the case. Anyway, that's fine. It's neither here nor there. I'll deal with it. In the meantime, I'm grateful that no one's discovered my Twitch account or my furry OnlyFans account. So in the meantime, Senorita Bit Bapadada remains mostly anonymous, trolling the sort of outer bounds of the internet, trying to catfish Bill Gates. So also, in the last 2 months, I've been doing a lot of reading that's been prescribed for me. I'm really growing as a reader. Once again, I volunteered to be a judge for the Booktube Prize, and I love what Robert is doing. He's wrangled up hundreds of online volunteers to review books, dozens and dozens of books that include fiction and nonfiction. And frankly, if you don't do anything else, if you stop this video, I just want you to go to thebooktubeprize.org, check out that list. Honestly, there's some great selections on the fiction side, and nonfiction just doesn't get enough play, and anything that's made the final list is probably well worth the read. So yes, do go check that out. And in the meantime, I sort of dread this sort of notion. I read about at a pace of a book a week, and with your cohort, you get 6 books, which means fine considering my work book club, my Discord book club. That's a full 2 months of reading, and I get a little freaked out in case I hit a book slump and get really anxious about the whole thing. And of course, this year, of all years, I hadn't read any of the 6 books that I was chosen to prior to the list. So yeah, a little bit panicked. So yeah, anyway, got through that really good. My results are in, so now I'm allowed to talk about the Booktube Prize, my cohort, and how I felt about them. So let's get to it from worst to first. Now, when I say worst, understand that the bar is set pretty high. This isn't a terrible novel. This is just the bottom of the list of the particular cohort that I read. And that was Brandon Taylor's debut novel, Real Life, which is a lightly fictionalized campus novel about a young black gay man in a Midwestern PhD science program. So super white, like sailing boats, Toyota Prius white. Like I have one black friend and I love Bob Marley white. And he really nails the microaggressions in this academic, pseudo-woke, progressive space. This place where, despite gestures of inclusion, one can feel diminished or made to feel small, and how it's almost impossible to give voice to that, because as soon as you do, you are treated as if you are overreacting. And then you start gaslighting yourself and thinking, yes, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe it isn't all about race, or maybe, yes, it is in fact about unconscious bias surrounding race. Not that it matters either way. I mean, if you do give voice to your concerns, it just means a doubling down by white folk. And then suddenly it becomes this sort of outrage. Any discomfort you feel for being diminished is pale in comparison to the umbrage they feel for even implying perhaps what they did is even slightly racist, and that you in fact are the shitty person for implying that they are less than an ideal progressive woke individual. And so you shrink a little bit, move on, and just forget about it. And Taylor captures the sort of impossibility of that situation as well as the mundane inevitability of it all. And Taylor also nails the precarity of the life of the mind. And this is a bit of a joke, really, because he is talking about a science PhD where I barely finished undergrad. And yet, for years after completing university, I would still wake up in a cold sweat, having a nightmare that I had missed a pivotal math final exam. And that my life was somehow ruined as a result of that, because I had completely blown my, math class, which had blown my grade point average, which pretty well had blown the 4-year trajectory that I'd put myself on. And then, what was my life even outside the confines of the school itself? And I'd just completely blown it. My life was pre-math blowout and post-math blowout. And the thing is, I didn't even take math. I'm an English major, for crying out loud. So Taylor just sort of nails that sentiment and ratchets it up to 11, because here we're talking about the final years of a science PhD program. So yeah, I loved how Taylor tackles these particular elements in the story, but overall I found the story a little bit baggy, but it's a debut novel, for crying out loud, and if Taylor is to be believed, it was written in less than 5 weeks, which seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of the books that I'm reading with my particular cohort, sort of targeting would-be authors. Frankly, if you haven't released your first novel yet to wide acclaim, you're doing it wrong and you're not even trying. This book has already been picked up by Kid Cudi to be turned into a movie. So yeah, 5 weeks. Why haven't you done that? Next up is Emma Donoghue's Pull of the Stars, which ranked low on my list, but actually made to the semi-final round at the Booktube Prize, so no accounting for taste, and what the hell do I know? This time out, Donoghue offers up a wildly prescient read. She finished this novel in 2018, well before the dumpster fire of 2020. This time out, it's focused on a flu pandemic that gripped Ireland almost a century earlier. We're introduced to maternity nurse Julia Power, who's working out of a repurposed supply closet with barely enough room to fit in 3 cots to turn it into a maternity ward. And right from the start, Donoghue is completely relentless. She gets rid of quotation marks and the story just steamrolls ahead in a breathless sort of pace. I swear Donoghue got a hold of a gynecological manual from the turn of the century and is intent on cramming in every birthing catastrophe and delivery method into this slim little book. And yeah, you start to feel about as claustrophobic as the supply closet where these women are giving birth. We have a woman dazed, coughing, clearly in the grip of the flu, another one mourning the loss of her child, another screaming in the midst of these contractions, and Donoghue is flitting from one to the other. And these girls are as young as 17 with barely any idea of what they're in for. One girl thinks that babies are just completely born from the belly button. Another didn't realize babies were alive inside the belly and thought they only came to life as soon as they exited the mother's body. And amidst the crazy, calamitous goings-on, the birthing, the bleeding, the screaming in this maternity ward, Donoghue manages to wedge in a warm story of a growing relationship between Nurse Power and her orphaned helpmate, Bridie Sweeney, introduces a real-life character, Kathleen Lynn, as a no-nonsense doctor that was part of the Easter uprising with the Sinn Féin. Anyway, the story is over in less than 3 days, and it is quick and breathless as a 24-year-old giving birth to her 9th child. There's Emily St. John Mandel's The Glass Hotel. This we actually read for the Work Book Club, so I was grateful to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And frankly, the discussion afterwards made me realize I think I like this book more than I initially thought, because, the book itself, it is all over the place. There are tangents and really sort of plot threads that are just coming out of nowhere. We are introduced at the beginning of the book to Paul. After a night out, some bad pills, and someone dies. And then we just drop Paul completely for most of the book. We're introduced to Vincent, his sister, who's working at a swanky Vancouver Island hotel, where she meets a Jonathan Alkaitis, who's clearly based on Bernie Madoff, who coincidentally died while I was reading the book. He was serving a lifetime in prison for his role in the largest Ponzi scheme in history. And so yeah, halfway through it becomes this sort of office novel about the people surrounding Alkaitis in this Ponzi scheme. There's questions around Vincent's mother's death, what happens to Vincent, some magical realism, a little Easter egg for Station 11. The thing is all over the place. At the same time, there were just aspects that completely worked for me. I think Mandel renders in such a compelling and believable way someone having a mental break. And I found myself nodding along thinking, yep, that would do it. That's probably how it would happen. Just completely buyable. And that middle section where she starts examining those people around John Alkaitis and their Ponzi scheme, and that moment when they realized what they were doing was wrong, was illegal, and how they reconciled themselves to that. Just thought about the numbers on the page, the growing money in their bank account. And they didn't think of themselves as bad people, but the days in which they could have raised their hand, voiced a concern, or gotten out completely continued to pile up and grow behind them, until inevitably it all comes falling down. and how all the characters in this story make a choice, a small concession that seems to grow over time, this idea of boiling a frog, and how they become less than active participants in their own life and just get pulled along in the wake of some larger forces, and how they sort of fit their life to fit within the contours of each successive moment. Anyway, I loved how she wrote about that, but it's another lumpy bit in this collection of lumpy bits that really doesn't cohere in a clear way for me. I still enjoyed many aspects of the book, and honestly, Mandel's writing is just fantastic. Now, Piranesi from Susanna Clarke. I'm going to keep this review short because I think half the fun is the sense of discovery in what one critic has called a puzzle box of a novel. Now, I admit, when I first started reading this, I was completely lost. I was intent on keeping track of where the action was and situating myself within the house. I mean, there's the 9th northern hall, the 8th vestibule, there's flooding in the lower stairwell. And it was important that I keep track of all of that. In that sense, I was the manifestation of the other intent, that the house had some vast knowledge that was there for the taking, a riddle meant to be unraveled for those willing to pay attention. Maybe this is just a meditation on sickness, or a reflection of what so many of us have experienced in this past year, confined to the four walls of our home. I mean, not for nothing, Susanna Clarke has spent a considerable time since the debut release of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell took the world by storm, and the reason for that was a debilitating chronic fatigue syndrome that kept her confined to her home and really slowed down the process of writing. And so this feels like a wrestling with the restrictions sickness has implied on her. Who knows? Either way, I thought the writing was fantastic. This thing is meant to be turned into a movie of some sort. Really did enjoy this read, and well worth checking out. Next up is Writers and Lovers by Lily King, and I love this novel, but it starts out so grim. I mean, Casey Beatbody, 31-year-old, aspiring writer. She's been working on her first novel for the last 6 years, long after many of her writing peers have put their novels away, gotten a license in real estate, married well, moved on, but not Casey. She is living in a repurposed potting shed that smells like loam and rotting leaves. She's barely covering her student debt payments, working as a waitress, serving grabby patrons as a shishi Harvard Square restaurant, and occasionally walking her landlord's dog to make a few extra bucks. A landlord that is completely dismissive of her aspirations, wondering how she could possibly have anything of interest worth writing. She gets health insurance, which only goes to reveal a potential litany of life-changing ailments at the hands of some indifferent doctors. And that's a lot. But on top of that, there's these two guys in her life. There's Oscar, recently widowed, father of two precocious, adorable little boys. He's a successful and accomplished writer, successful enough that he's occasionally recognized in restaurants. I mean, think about the authors that you would recognize in a restaurant. That list is really small. Anyway, he invites Casey into his life. But there's also Silas, who is a high school teacher struggling with his first novel as well. He's got a chipped tooth and a rusted out car, and he's maybe a little bit flaky, bails, completely ghosts on Casey after her first date. So yes, like I said, a lot. The story is set in 1997, 2 years before Lily King would publish her debut novel, and it is such a grim portrayal of working class America. So much so I felt almost leery about the optimistic ending. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved it. I wanted it for Casey. I was completely moved by it, but I couldn't help but feel a little manipulated for something that is so clear-eyed about the creative struggle, the financial precarity of living in America, how health disaster, anything could really derail all of your hopes, your dreams, and send you down a completely different path. It felt like the ending veered almost into a realm of fantasy, but regardless, love the writing. On the strength of this novel, I'm totally picking up Lily King's earlier work, Euphoria, and I cannot wait. This book has been optioned to be Toni Collette's directorial debut, so I can't wait to see that as well. And finally, Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart, the one book that I promised myself that I would never, ever read. I mean, look at this black and white cover, just so dour, and the dust jacket copy telling me that it's about a gay boy growing up in Glasgow, Scotland, and it's like, literary misery, porn, parading gay suffering, big, hard nope. Wins the Booktube Prize, and if anything, just reinforces my notion that this is probably a dire and bleak read. And then the Booktube Prize, the one thing that could possibly compel me to read the book. And yes, of course, it ends up in my particular cohort for judging. So I read all other 5 books in my particular cohort, leave this to the last. Finally, grit my teeth, open up the 400 plus pages of the novel, and we're introduced to 1980s Glasgow, Scotland. Dire, grim, dingy, poor Glasgow, Scotland. And then I'm immediately hooked, loosely based on Stuart's own childhood growing up as the youngest son of a single alcoholic mother. This isn't the story of Shuggie, but more the story of Shuggie's mother and his undying loyalty to her. They are living in council housing, surrounded by unemployed minors, dirty-faced kids, mean, drunken gossips, and folks prying open electric meters to steal the coins within. Meanwhile, Shuggie's mom is drinking herself into a stupor. She is screaming in the telephone, railing against the men who've done her wrong, sticking her head in the oven, lighting her bedroom on fire, driving her 2 eldest kids away. She is this huge presence on the page, and through all of this, Shuggie remains loyal to her. He is clear-eyed about her faults and her problem and loves her still, can see the effort that she puts in keeping up appearances, and recognizes the small vestige of past glamour still there. So less gay trauma and more about the resilience of love in the face of a challenging and difficult person. Shuggie loves his mom despite all of her flaws. The book, it is heartbreaking at times, but it is not in the sense that you feel like Stuart's mining her misery in some showy, writerly way. Instead, it is a confident portrayal of a very complex person, warts and all, that Shuggie adores, remains loyal to throughout. And I love how Stuart peppers the entire book with a lot of regionalism. So you get notions of Boke, Stour, Smur, Glyket, Gallus, and more Boke. This is a debut novel from Douglas Stewart, who, not for nothing, managed to write this after working 12-hour days as a senior director of design over at Banana Republic. So I don't know what the rest of you blokes have been doing, not pushing out your debut novel. I mean, this entire list is filled with debut novels showing the rest of us that we are simply not working hard enough. Okay, so that's it. I am just exhausted. It's been so long since I've shot a video, and then I do something like this. But there it is, my ranking for the Booktube Prize quarterfinal fiction round, my particular cohort. Go check out the booktubeprize.org for the semifinal and final rounds for fiction and nonfiction. In the meantime, thinking about travel, it feels like there's this narrow window of opportunity where demand is down and prices are reasonable. It feels like this would take an uptick overnight as everyone tries to escape their current reality and travel somewhere else, and travel companies try to recoup the losses of the last year. Prices go through the roof. Meantime, the Discord is eyeing Japan for 2022. I mean, this is a central location for everyone who comes into the book club. Easier said than done, I realize, but who knows? Meanwhile, Kay's Discord is looking at the Christmas holiday somewhere in the United States. The front runner, unfortunately, is New York. Kay's been there like twice during the Christmas season. I'm trying to advocate for Chicago. I think they would have a great time there. Group of about 5 or 6 folks, generally different, as with traveling any group, different ideas of what is fun within a city. So it's kind of hard to appease everyone. But it's wild to be thinking about travel already. I'm excited for that soon, hopefully. Anyway, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well, staying safe. Have a great week of reading. Hopefully it won't be another month before another video comes, but who knows? Meantime, we'll talk to you later.